Hello everyone, thank you very much for signing in and watching my live stream. I'm Mr. Matt and this is Dr. Tot. Dr. Tot, cookie for class? Very good. And welcome to SAT ACT Prep. This is live stream 8 of the miscellaneous practice problems. So I'm going to present these problems to you in pairs, and we're going to get 3 examples of each, and then we'll conclude class with 6 pairs in total. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you. If you have questions at any point, then please post them in the live chat feed or the comment section below. If you find these videos helpful, then I would invite you to hit the like button and share with your friends. And hello and welcome to all the new subscribers. Thank you very much. I appreciate you. And so just a little reminder, this is a live session, so there's a little bit of a delay with the iPad, but I'll mitigate that by monitoring the live stream. And I'm going to give you 6 minutes to solve each pair of problems after I read them aloud to you. And 2 minutes into those 6 minutes, I'll start to solve to give you some hints. So question number 1, the length of rectangle A is tripled and the width is doubled to create rectangle B. If the length and width of rectangle B are both doubled to create rectangle C, the area of rectangle C represents what percent increase from the area of rectangle A? So this should be then the area of rectangle C represents what percent increase from the area of rectangle A. Question number 2 says, if f of x is equal to 3 times the quantity x plus 3 squared minus 2, and h of x is equal to 2x minus 6, how many times do the functions intersect? So I'll give you 6 minutes, and 2 minutes in I'll start to solve. Excuse me. Sorry, the vibrate was on. I apologize. So with number 1, if we assume easy to work with values for the first rectangle, let's say that the width was 1 and the length was 2, then we can extrapolate into the rectangle B's dimension and rectangle C's dimension by just applying the appropriate scalar that they give to us in the problem. So they say that rectangle B is created by tripling the length of A and doubling the width of A. So let's let the width equal 1 and the length be equal to 2. So that's where I started right here, highlighting in red. So if we let the width of rectangle A be 1 and the length be equal to 2, then I'm going to triple the length, or multiply it by 3, and double the width, or multiply it by 2. So I'm going to take 2 times 3. So the length of rectangle B would be 2 times 3 is 6. The width would be 1 times 2, which is 2. So rectangle B's dimension would be 2 by 6. Now they say rectangle C is created by doubling both the width and the length of rectangle B. So rectangle C's length would be 6 times 2, the length of rectangle B times 2, which would be 12. The width would be the width of rectangle B, which is 2, times 2. So that would be 2 times 2, which is 4. Now if we find the area of each of these rectangles, remember that area of a rectangle is equal to length times width. So for A, we're going to have 1 times 2. So we're going to have an area, total area of 2. For rectangle C, we're going to have 4 times 12. So the total area would be equal to 48. Now you also need to memorize this equation over to the left that I wrote. This is the equation for percentage change. They're not going to give this to you. They're going to expect you to have memorized it. And so percentage change is always equal to the final value minus the initial value divided by the initial value. So what you end up with minus what you started with divided by what you started with. And that's going to give you a decimal answer. So if they ask you for a percentage, you're going to have to multiply by 100. So in fact, I'm going to just go ahead and write that in another color, times 100, because if you want a percentage, you have to write, if you're going to write the percentage sign, you have to make sure that you've converted into a percentage. Oftentimes, they're going to present the decimal answer as one of the answer selections, and that's going to be the attractive distractor, like the most the most correct wrong answer. And that's where they're really trying to trick you. So here, A was an attractive distractor because when we do this final minus initial over initial, the final area was 48 square units. The initial area was 2 square units, so we have 48 minus 2 quantity over 2. 48 minus 2 is 46. 46 divided by 2 is 23. But 23 is the decimal answer. That's not a percent. And notice that answer selection A is 23%. In order to write the percentage sign, you have to move the decimal place 2 places to the right, or in other words, multiply by 100. So if we multiply 23 times 100, we get 2300, which is answer selection C. For number 2, we have 2 different types of functions going on, and that's the first step here. We need to be able to identify that function f of x is an exponential, or excuse me, is a parabola. It's a quadratic function. And h of x is a linear function. It's a line. You can tell that by the square that's present in f of x and the variable to only the first degree in h of x. So I started with the linear function because it's a little bit easier. The approach here, we know that this is in y equals mx plus b. Remember that m is equal to your slope. Your slope is going to be your change in y divided by your change in x. In other words, you can remember it as your rise over your run. How much you're changing vertically divided by how much you're changing horizontally. Or in other words, the ratio of the change in y, the vertical change, to the change in x, the horizontal change. This can also be calculated because we just talked about change is always final minus initial, right? So this is also calculated between any 2 points as the difference of their y coordinates divided by their difference, the difference of their x coordinates. So y2 minus y1 quantity divided by x2 minus x1. So that's the slope. That's what m represents. B is your y-intercept. And that's the value of y when x equals 0. And that makes sense. It's also therefore the place that the function crosses the y-axis, and that's true because the y-axis only occurs at x is equal to 0. The x-axis only occurs when y is equal to 0, so there's kind of that similarity there, that congruency, that symmetry. Y and x are inputs and outputs, so the input there is x and the output is y. So when examining this, I like to start with the y-intercept. That's the easiest place to start. That's going to tell me where the function crosses the y-axis. That has a b here is equal to -6. So I draw a point on the y-axis at y is equal to -6, and that's my starting point. Looking at my slope, m is equal to 2. When trying to analyze or to graphically apply what the slope means in sketching out a plot, it's easier to think about the slope as a fraction, and you can write any whole number as a fraction by just putting it over 1. So 2 is the same thing as 2 over 1. So when thinking about this slope and plotting out these points, I'm going to think about the change in y to the change in x is 2 to 1. We're going up 2 over 1. So for every 2 that I go up, I go over or right 1. So I can go, and so that would be another point that I could plot. I can go up 2 and over 1 again. And then finally, if I go up 2 and over 1 a last time, I hit the x-axis at 3, 0. And so you can connect all of those points together and sketch out a line. For the parabola, this is in vertex form. So vertex form is y is equal to a times x minus h quantity squared plus k. Remember that a is a stretch or a shrink factor. H is your horizontal shift. And k is your vertical shift. Remember that your horizontal shift is opposite common sense because the formula, the equation, implicitly has that negative sign attached to h, whereas k has an addition sign next to it. So all of the values of h, all of the values that are inputted, or any value that's inputted for h, substituted in for h, is going to have its sign negated. So when you view an equation that's in vertex form, you have to negate the implication of the sign that you see. So here, you have a +3 that's next to the x. Normally, a change in x along the x-axis of +3 would usually imply, or you would think that it would imply, right 3. But it's opposite common sense. +3 as an h value is going to be left 3. K, however, it goes with common sense. So if it says plus, that means up. If it says minus, that means down. So that's the only real tricky part there. The stretch and shrink factor, if a is greater than 1, it's going to be more narrow. It's going to increase dramatically, very fast. If a is in between, if a is in between 0 and 1, it's going to be a wide function. And when a is negative, that means it's flipped around the x-axis. So applying these characteristics to this given equation, We have an A value of 3, we have a horizontal shift left 3, and we have a vertical shift down 2. So in sketching this, start with the H and the K values. That's going to give you the coordinates of your vertex. So the coordinates here, H is opposite common sense, so it's going to be -3 and comma -2. K goes with common sense, so it's a -2, so in reality it's also -2. So our vertex here is going to be -3, -2, so I started with that point of -3, -2. And then I'm just looking at my A value, it's 3, which is greater than 1. So that means that this function is going to increase dramatically, making it rather narrow. So that's really subjective. I just made sure that I didn't make it open super wide. It kind of increases really fast. And if you examine these two functions together, you'll see that f of x, the parabola, starts above the linear function and it increases rather dramatically. The linear function is off to the right and continues that way. So these functions are actually never going to intersect. So the answer to number 1 was C, and the answer to number 2 was A. Question number 3 asks, and I already see this typo coming up, so I'm going to just fix it now. So the length of rectangle A is tripled, and the width is tripled to create rectangle B. If the length and width of rectangle B are both doubled to create rectangle C, then the area of rectangle C represents what % increase of the area of rectangle A? Question number 4 asks, if f of x is equal to 3 times the quantity x plus 3 minus 2, and h of x is equal to -1/4 times the quantity x plus 3 quantity squared minus 2, how many times do the functions intersect? So I'll give you 6 minutes. After 2 minutes, I'll start to solve. Okay, so let's look at these two problems. So for number 3, if we assume easy to work with values for the width and length of rectangle A, let's say the width is 1 and the length is 2, then they say we get rectangle B by tripling both the length and the width of rectangle A. So 1 times 3 is 3, 2 times 3 is 6, so the width of rectangle B would be 3, the length of rectangle B would be 6. They say that we get rectangle C by doubling both of the width and lengths of rectangle B. So 3 times 2 is 6, which would be the width of rectangle C, and 6 times 2 is 12, which would be the length of rectangle C. Now we have all the information necessary to calculate the areas involved. Notice that I'm not calculating the area of rectangle B because we're not asked about anything relevant to rectangle B, or at least relevant to the area of rectangle B. So it would be needless and it would be a waste of time, which we don't want to waste. So the area of rectangle A would be 1 times 2, which is 2. The area of rectangle C would be 6 times 12, which is 72. Doing the percentage change calculation of final minus initial divided by initial whole thing times 100 if you want a percentage answer is going to give us 72 minus 2, quantity divided by 2, and then times 100 if you want a percent. 72 minus 2 is 70. 70 divided by 2 is 35, but remember that's a decimal answer, so we need to multiply it by 100 to convert it into a percentage. 35 times 100 is 3,500, so the percentage increase in area from rectangle A to rectangle B is 3,500%, and that's answer selection C. For number 4, now we have 2 parabolas rather than 1 parabola and a line. So we're really just looking at, or using rather, the vertex form, which is A times x minus h quantity squared plus k. So remember that your h value, your horizontal shift, is opposite common sense. So here it's plus 3. That means left 3, not right 3 along the x-axis. So the x-coordinate of both of these vertexes, because you can see that they share the same h and k values. So the vertexes of these 2 parabolas are both -3, -2. And then examining the a value of the first parabola, f of x, is greater than 1, so it's going to, and it's positive. So its positivity means that it opens upward, and the value being greater than 1 means that it's going to be rather narrow because it's going to increase quickly. The a value of h of x is -1/4. So because it's negative, it's flipped around and it's opening downward. And it has an a value in between 0 and 1. 1/4 is in between 0 and 1. So it's going to be rather wide and increase slowly. Or in this case, because it's flipped downward, it's decreasing slowly. But anyway, its rate of change is slow. It's slower than if its a value were greater than 1. So you can see that they actually intersect exactly once right at their vertexes. So the answer to number 4 was B. Question number 5 asks, the length and the width of rectangle A are doubled to create rectangle B. If the length and width of rectangle B are both quadrupled to create rectangle C, then the area of rectangle C represents what % increase from the area of rectangle A? And question number 6 asks, if f of x is equal to 2 times the quantity x minus 1 quantity squared minus 2, and h of x is equal to 2x plus 3, how many times do the functions intersect? So I'll give you 6 minutes, and after 2 minutes, I'll start to solve. Okay, so for number 5, if we assume easy to work with numbers like 1 and 2 again, then we're going to double the width and the length to create rectangle B. So 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4. The width and length of rectangle B respectively would be 2 and 4. And then we're going to quadruple, meaning times 4, the width and the length of rectangle B in order to obtain the dimensions of rectangle C. So rectangle B, we're going to have, the rectangle C would have dimensions of 2 times 4, which would be 8, and a length of 4 times 4, which would be 16. Calculating the areas, we're going to have length times width of rectangle A to be equal to 1 times 2, which is 2. The area of rectangle C is going to be equal to 16 times 8, which is 128. Calculating percentage change, that's final minus initial, quantity divided by initial, whole thing times 100. So final is 128, initial is 2, so we're going to have 128 minus 2 divided by 2 times 100. 128 minus 2 is 126. 126 divided by 2 is going to be 63. 63 times 100 is going to represent a 6,300% increase. And that is answer selection D. For question number 6, so first if we start off with, well, you can start off with either one of them, but I started with f of x. So the vertex of this parabola is at positive 1, because the h is opposite common sense. So we have a vertex at positive 1, negative 2. So I started there and plotted the vertex at positive 1, negative 2. And then looking at the a value, it's greater than 1 because a is equal to 2. So I know it's going to increase rather quickly, and so it's going to be slightly narrow. So I just drew that in approximately. Then I went over to the linear equation h of x. It has a b value of positive 3, so that means that it crosses the y-axis at positive 3, where y is equal to positive 3. And then we have a slope of 2. So if our m value is equal to 2, we can think of it as a fraction, as 2 over 1. So that means the change that the slope of 2 represents is up to right 1. Or you can reverse that, down to left 1. So going from my point of y is equal to positive 3, the y-intercept of positive 3, then I can go up to right 1, and I can go down to left 1, and plot those 2 points on either side of the y-intercept. Really, you just need 2 points, but I made 3 just to be sure. And then you can connect all of those points together to draw out your line. You'll notice that the parabola, remember, continues infinitely. So these 2 lines, whoops, I didn't want to do that. So these 2 functions are going to intersect at 2 points. So the answer to number 6 is going to be C, 2 intersections. If you have any questions, then please let me know. Otherwise, let's look at the next 2 types of problems that we're going to go through today. Number 7 asks, to the nearest hundredth, what is the value of the cosine of the acute angle formed by the x-axis and the equation y is equal to 2x minus 4? Question number 8 asks, at Jonathan's Bakery, an apple pie costs $7.25 and a pecan pie costs $8.75. If one day Jonathan sells 80 pies and made $647.50, how many apple pies did he sell? I'll give you 6 minutes, and after 2 minutes I'll begin to solve. Okay, so for number 7, if we draw out this line that has the equation of 2x minus 4, so the b value that's in the form mx plus b, so the b value there is going to be negative 4. That represents a y-intercept of negative 4. The slope is 2. So you can think of the slope, again, if m is equal to 2, you can think of that as a fraction as just 2 over 1. So that means up 2, right 1, because they're both positive. So up 2, right 1. So starting at negative 4, we can go up 2, right 1, up 2, right 1, up 2, right 1, and we can plot out this line kind of growing in steps. Now, they're interested in the cosine of the acute angle formed by the x-axis and the equation y is equal to 2x minus 4. So I drew in that little sign. I'm going to highlight it here in red. So that little symbol that looks like almost like a Q, but kind of like an O with a little loop at the top of it. So I'm highlighting it in red there. That is theta. So that is oftentimes used in math to represent an angle measure. So, and especially in trigonometry, it's used because it's usually in terms of radians rather than degrees. That doesn't matter for this problem, but in either way, it just represents, you could have also represented it as x, some unknown. So it just represents some unknown angle measure. So they're asking for the cosine of theta. Well, cosine is a trigonometric function that represents the ratio of the adjacent side length of a triangle to its hypotenuse relative to a specific angle. So the cosine of theta is equal to adjacent divided by hypotenuse. We have the relative to theta, the adjacent side is 1, the opposite side is 2, and you can see that I kind of drew that triangle again in red to the right of the graph, and I can tell by the coordinate system that the base of the triangle has a length of 1. The height of the triangle, or that second side on the right, has a height of 2, because I can tell that from the graph. That's straight from the slope itself, up to right 1. So that makes sense, but I don't know yet the hypotenuse of this triangle. So you need to use the Pythagorean Theorem. A squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. Remember, you can use that with any right triangle, but only right triangles. However, substituting those values in, we're going to get 1 squared plus 2 squared is equal to c squared. 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 1 plus 4 is 5. So 5 is equal to c squared. So the square root of 5 is equal to c, or that hypotenuse. So the cosine of theta is equal to the adjacent side divided by the hypotenuse. So it's going to be 1 divided by the square root of 5, which if you evaluate in your calculator is going to be 0.447, which I'm going to round to 0.45. And let me just put in, just bubble in there. So the answer to number 7 is 0.45. At 8, we can write two equations. This is a very typical system of equations problem that you'll see on the SAT and ACT. So oftentimes you're able to, oftentimes these problems are in the context of selling something. So usually you're going to be able to write an equation in terms of the number of items and the number of dollars made in revenue, which would be dependent on the individual price of the items being sold. There are other contexts in which this can arise, but usually it is somebody selling two items. So we know that an apple pie costs $7.25 and a pecan pie costs $8.75. We know that he sold a total of 80 pies and made a total of $647.50. So let X represent the number of apple pies and let Y equal the number of pecan pies. Therefore, we can write two equations that I'm going to highlight in red here. So the starting equations are one for the number of items, which is X plus Y is equal to 80, because there's a total number of 80 pies sold that day. And then the second is $7.25 times the number of apple pies plus $8.75 times the number of pecan pies has to equal $647.50, which is the total revenue made that day. Obviously, the first equation is much simpler than the second, so I'm going to use the first to substitute into the second. I'm ultimately asked for how many apple pies did he sell that day, which is X. So if you do a little forethought, you can actually save yourself a few steps in this problem. Ultimately, I want to know X. So I'm going to first isolate for Y so I can get rid of Y in my second equation. If you didn't isolate for Y here, if you isolated for X instead of Y, that's okay. That just means when you substitute in, you're going to actually eliminate the variable that you're interested in, but you're going to obtain a value for the other variable, which means at the end of that calculation, you can take that number and plug it in and find the missing value that you're interested in. So just notice that it adds one extra step, but you would still obtain the same number as long as you did the correct mathematics. So if we know that we're interested in X, I'm going to first isolate for Y, so then I can sub Y out of the second equation, and I'm only left with items in terms of X, which is the variable I want. So if I isolate for Y, the first equation for Y, I'm going to subtract X on both sides, so I get Y is equal to 80 minus X. So that means that those two expressions are equivalent to each other. So Y is the same thing as 80 minus X. So wherever I see Y in the second equation, I can substitute it out for the quantity 80 minus X. You just need to make sure that you distribute whichever value is on the outside of the parentheses to each value inside the parentheses. So subbing out for Y, we're going to get $7.25 times X plus $8.75 times the quantity 80 minus X, not Y anymore, but the quantity 80 minus X is equal to $647.50. So distributing that $8.75 to the 80 and to the negative X, 8.75 times 80 is going to be 700. 8.75 times negative X is negative 8.75X. I'm combining like terms, so 7.25x minus 8.75x is going to give us a negative 1.5x. And then I also subtracted on both sides by 700. So that left me on the right with negative 52.5. 647.5 minus 700 is negative 52.5. And then finally, dividing by negative 1.5. Negative 52.5 divided by negative 1.5 is going to be a positive 35. So that day, Jonathan sold 35 apple pies. If you have any questions, then please let me know. Otherwise, let's look at 9 and 10. Question number 9 asks, to the nearest hundredth, what is the value of the sine of the acute angle formed by the x-axis and the equation y is equal to 3x minus 6. Question number 10 asks, at Jonathan's Bakery, an apple pie costs $9.25 and a pecan pie costs $8.50. If one day Jonathan sells 90 pies and made $796.50, how many pecan pies did he sell? So I'll give you 6 minutes, and after 2, I'll start to solve. Okay, so let's look at these guys. So number 9, if we plot that line out, starting at the y-intercept of -6, then the slope increases with a +3. So we can think about that as a fraction as 3 over 1. So it's going to change as up 3, right 1. So plotting out those few points, you're going to get up 3 over 1 2 times to get to the x-axis, and you can go another time to create that acute angle that the line would make with the x-axis. And then I drew that triangle, that subsequent triangle that would be made off to the right there. And you can see that the base would have a unit of 1, and the height there, the right side, would have a length of 3. Using the Pythagorean theorem of a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared, we can solve for the hypotenuse to be 1 squared plus 3 squared, or 1 plus 9, or in other words 10, being equal to c squared. So c is equal to the square root of 10. And now sine is the ratio of the opposite side length to the hypotenuse. Or in other words, respective to the angle that you're speaking of, it's the opposite side length divided by the hypotenuse. The opposite side length here is 3. The hypotenuse is the square root of 10. So 3 divided by the square root of 10 is going to be 0.948, which rounded to the nearest hundredth is 0.95. For number 10, we can write two equations, one for the number of pies. So if we let x equal the apple pies and y equal the pecan pies, then we know that x plus y has to be equal to 90. And then we also know that there was a total of $796.50 made in revenue. So the price of apple pies times the number of apple pies plus the price of pecan pies times the number of pecan pies would be equal to the total amount of revenue made that day. So we can write the equation 9.25x plus 8.5y is equal to 796.5. Now here they're asking us for the total number of pecan pies, not apple pies. So now I want to end up with y. So if I want to end up with y, I want to first sub out x in order to save a step and to save some time. So taking the simpler equation, the first one, and isolating for x, we're going to get x is equal to 90 minus y. That means wherever I see x in the second equation, I can substitute out for 90, the quantity 90 minus y, just making sure to distribute that 9.25 to both the 90 and the negative y. So 9.25 times 90 is 832.5. 9.25 times negative y is going to be a negative 9.25y. Combining like terms, we're going to get negative 0.75y. And on the right, when we subtract away 832.5 on both sides, we're going to get a negative 36. So negative 0.75y is equal to negative 36. So y is equal to negative 36 divided by negative 0.75, which is going to give us 48. So the answer to number 9 was 0.95. And the answer to number 10 is 48. Let me clean this up so it's a little bit 0.95. If you have any questions, then please let me know. Otherwise, let's take a look at the last pair of problems for today. Number 11 asks, to the nearest hundredth, what is the value of the tangent of the acute angle formed by the x-axis and the equation y is equal to 4x minus 12? Number 12 asks, at Jonathan's Bakery, an apple pie costs $6.10 and a pecan pie costs $7.30. If one day Jonathan sells 120 pies and made $808.80, what is the ratio of the number of apple pies sold to the number of pecan pies sold? So I'll give you 6 minutes, and after 2 minutes, I'll begin solving. Okay, so for number 11, if we sketch out rather 4x minus 12, we have an y-intercept of negative 12, and we have a slope of 4. So that means we're going up 4 over 1, up 4, right 1. If you do that 3 times, you're going to get to a x-intercept of positive 3, 0. And then if you go one more time, you'll create the actual angle that we're talking about. So that's the little theta that the function is making with the x-axis. I redrew that triangle to the right. And actually here, I went ahead and solved for the hypotenuse, but because they're asking for the tangent doesn't involve the hypotenuse. It actually only involves the opposite and adjacent side lengths of an angle. So therefore, we actually have all of the the side lengths that we need. So the tangent of this angle is going to be equal to the opposite side divided by the adjacent side. The opposite side of theta is 4. The adjacent side is 1. So the tangent here is just equal to 4 divided by 1, which is 4. Now for number 12, they say that we can write 2 equations, one for the number of items and the other for the number of dollars made in revenue. So we know that x plus y has to be equal to 120. And we know that the price of apple pies, $6.10 times x, the number of apple pies, plus the price of pecan pies, $7.30 times the number of pecan pies, y, has to equal the total revenue made for that day of $808.80. Here they're ultimately asking for the ratio of the number of apple pies sold to the number of pecan pies. So because they're asking for the ratio of values, we need both of them. So it doesn't matter which you start with. I isolated for x, but it would be totally fine if you isolated for y. Because we need both of them, we're ultimately going to have to solve for both. So x is equal to 120 minus y. I'm just subtracting the y over in the first equation. And then I'm substituting that quantity into the second equation for the variable x. So x times the quantity 120 minus y plus 7.3y has to be equal to 808.8. 6.1 times 120 is going to give us 732. 6.1 times negative y is going to be a negative 6.1y. And then 7.3 minus 6.1y is going to be a 1.2. So we have 1.2y is equal to, and subtracting the 732 on both sides, we're going to get 808.8 minus 732 is 76.8. Finally, dividing by 1.2 on both sides, we're going to find y, or the number of pecan pies sold, to be equal to 76.8 divided by 1.2, which is 64. You can then take that value for y and plug it back into either one of the equations. But here's the thing, don't plug it into that terribly complex second equation. Use the easier equation because they're both equivalent terms. They both represent x and y in the same true fashion in this context, or in this problem's context. So don't pick the harder equation, pick the easier one. So we have x plus 64, because we know y is equal to 64, is equal to 120. And if we do 120 minus 64, we get 56. So the ratio of apple to pecan is 56 to 64, which as a decimal is 0.875. But let's see if we can simplify both of them, and we can. Notice that 56 over 64, we can divide both of those values by 8. 56 divided by 8 is 7. 64 divided by 8 is 8. So actually, in simplified fractional form, this would be 7/8. The problem with the decimal answer of 0.875 is that we can't fit those all unless, well, actually, you could put, so these are the two acceptable answers. We could put decimal point 875, because if we don't use a leading 0, we actually can fit all the digits in there. So that's one acceptable answer, and then the other acceptable value would just be the fraction. You could say, 7/8 7 fraction bar 8 to represent 7/8. So the answer to number 12 was either 7/8 or 0.875, and the answer to number 11 was 4. If you have any questions on anything that we've done today, then please let me know in the comment section below. If you find these videos useful, then again, please hit the like button and share with your friends. And otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful day. Dr. Todd, do you want to say bye to everybody? Come on, let's say bye. Come on. Can you sit? You say bye? Come on, bye. There you go. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you all soon.